Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving straight into the fascinating, often dark, and absolutely world-shaping 10,000-year history of sugar. You know, it's a commodity that's literally been front and center as empires rose, as millions were tragically enslaved, and as the Industrial Revolution completely transformed human civilization. Okay, let's just shift our perspective for a second here. To really wrap our heads around the scale of this story, we have to recognize that what we so casually hand over to kids today, in sodas and snacks, was once literally locked behind apothecary counters, right next to opium and rare spices. It was this incredibly precious substance, prescribed by ancient physicians and medieval apothecaries for everything from a basic cough to depression. Well, our world has drastically changed since then. Today, the average American consumes over 100 pounds of sugar every single year. Just think about that for a second. That is roughly the weight of a large dog in sugar consumed by one person annually. No way, right? But how exactly did we get here? Well, the journey to this extreme level of consumption actually started millennia ago. We can trace its slow expansion back about 10,000 years, starting with indigenous people chewing wild stalks in the jungles of New Guinea. From there, it makes its way to India around 3500 BC. That's where farmers first figured out how to boil the juice and crystallize it into a rough solid they called khanda. Then, jumping ahead to between the 7th and 13th centuries, Arab traders during the Islamic Golden Age really perfected the refining process, eventually introducing it to European crusaders who then carried it all the way back west. The sheer bewilderment this sweetgrass caused early Westerners is honestly incredible. When Alexander the Great's armies reached India, his officer Nearchus described it as, quote, a reed that produces honey without bees. To the ancient Western world, the whole idea of a sweet grass was just mind-boggling. And for centuries, it stayed that way, an impossibly expensive luxury. It was a massive status symbol that European kings would display as literal sculptures of wealth at their royal banquets. Part 1. The Engine of Slavery: Blood and Sweetness. Now, this is where our history takes a very dark, deeply consequential turn. As European demand for sugar absolutely skyrocketed, colonial powers realized a glaring problem. Sugarcane needs a tropical climate. They just couldn't grow it at home. So this sparked a desperate scramble for the Caribbean, birthing an unfathomably cruel labor system. Producing sugar back then was an unrelenting 24-hour hell. Enslaved workers were forced to cut cane entirely by hand in extreme tropical heat. They defeat stalks into massive grinding mills around the clock, constantly risking severed limbs, and then boil the juice in suffocating boiling houses that frequently hit 140 degrees Fahrenheit. The human cost of this demand was truly horrifying. The conditions on these plantations were so bad that owners actually calculated it was literally cheaper to actively work people to death and just buy replacements, rather than provide even basically humane living conditions. Because of this, the average life expectancy for an enslaved person after arriving on a Caribbean sugar plantation was just 7 years. Just 7 years. So sugar didn't just benefit from slavery, it was the very economic engine driving it. But this systemic cruelty eventually ignited massive geopolitical shifts. In 1791, enslaved workers launched the Haitian Revolution, successfully destroying France's absolute most profitable colony. This overnight collapse in sugar revenue completely shattered Napoleon's dreams of an empire in the Americas. I mean, without Haiti's sugar money, holding onto his North American lands made zero financial sense. It essentially forced Napoleon to sell the Louisiana Territory to the United States for a mere $15 million. Think about that. Literally doubling the size of the U.S., all because of sugar. Part 2. Revolution and Rivalry: The Turning Point. Losing Haiti was a massive wake-up call for Europe. Suddenly, losing that tropical monopoly forced these European powers to rethink their entire supply chain. Cut off by British naval blockades, Napoleon desperately needed a domestic source of sweetness, so he poured massive resources into temperate beet sugar production right across France. This sparked an intense, century-long rivalry between tropical cane sugar and European farm-grown beet sugar. And, well, you know what happens when two massive supply chains compete, right? They drive prices down to historic lows. Part 3. Fueling the Industrial Age. So now, sugar was perfectly positioned for its next global role. Suddenly cheap and incredibly abundant, it arrived just in time to literally, physically fuel the Industrial Revolution. Industrialists quickly realized that factory workers, who were putting in brutal 12 to 14-hour shifts, needed fast energy. The British government actually lowered tariffs specifically so that working-class factory hands could survive on cheap, energy-dense cups of sweetened tea and jam. It was basically a cheap way to keep the workforce moving without the expense of providing real, substantial meals. And because of this, consumption numbers absolutely skyrocketed. We're talking going from just 4 pounds per person in 1700 up to 18 pounds in 1800, and then exploding to over 100 pounds by the late 20th century. As these new industrialized mills pumped out blindingly white, heavily refined sugar, it fully transitioned from being this elite medieval medicine to an absolutely inescapable dietary staple. Part 4. The Great Sugar Cover-Up. By the mid-20th century, as consumption was peaking, the health consequences became completely undeniable. But what the industry did next was pretty shocking. Internal company data was showing strong links between sugar consumption and heart disease. Instead of warning us, though, the industry just opened up the tobacco playbook. In 1967, the Sugar Research Foundation paid Harvard scientists the modern equivalent of $50,000 to publish a major study. Their goal? Downplay sugar's role in heart disease and falsely blame dietary fat instead. This manufactured science caused a totally devastating ripple effect. For decades, the public was told that fat was the ultimate enemy. Low-fat diets became the absolute gold standard for global nutritional policy. But here's the catch. When food companies removed fat, the food tasted terrible. So what was their solution? They just replaced that fat with heavy amounts of sugar to maintain the flavor. It basically tricked the public into consuming massive amounts of sugar, all under the guise of eating health food. And while all this research was being actively buried, scientists in the 1970s were busy developing something new: high fructose corn syrup. By converting heavily subsidized cornstarch, they created a cheap, liquid sweetener. This gave the industry an even cheaper, far more easily blended alternative to traditional cane sugar. By 1984, major soda brands had completely switched over to this liquid sweetener. And because it's so cheap and blends so smoothly into liquids, it quietly infiltrated almost every single processed food in the modern supermarket. We're not just talking about candy here. It's hidden in your pasta sauce, it's baked into your everyday bread, and it's packed into your salad dressings and yogurt. Because it's hidden literally everywhere, we're unknowingly consuming staggering amounts of the stuff. Today, the average American takes in about 17 teaspoons of added sugar a day. To put that into perspective, the recommended limit is just 6 teaspoons for women and 9 for men. A single can of regular soda easily blows past that entire daily limit in just one sitting. Part 5. Our Sweet Modern Crisis. The legacy of all this corporate deception and industrial food manipulation is a staggering public health epidemic. Right now, 42% of American adults are classified as obese, over 37 million have diabetes, and heart disease remains the #1 killer. Now, while sugar isn't the sole cause of these complex health issues, decades of research definitely confirm it's a massive driving factor behind these skyrocketing rates globally. Fortunately, the tide might be starting to turn. Some governments are finally pushing back. For example, Mexico introduced a soda tax in 2014, and consumption dropped by an impressive 12% in the first year. That actually inspired similar levies in the UK and several US cities, proving that local legislation can be really effective at reducing consumption, even while the sugar industry spends millions lobbying against it. It's pretty incredible to think that a simple grass from a jungle in New Guinea somehow conquered the entire globe. It built immense fortunes, drove the horrors of slavery, and literally toppled empires. So the next time you sit down to eat, just take a moment to consider the 10,000-year history hiding right inside your pantry. After everything we've talked about, what is it doing in your kitchen right now?